Joining me on the channel today is Gary Pedler, author of Amy McDougall, Master Matchmaker, out now from Fitzroy Books. The middle grade novel follows a girl on a quest to find a boyfriend for her adoptive dad. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you for having me. We've already had a fun little pre-chat, so I'm warmed up and ready to go, I think.
Awesome. I always like to start at the beginning, and especially for our kidlit writers, and explore your path to becoming a published author. So what kind of kid were you?
Well, one thing about me was I was a little kid. I was a sissy, like a lot of gay men, not all, but a lot. And so I was running around the neighborhood and our home dressed in my mother's old clothes.
I love that. But the kids
I should show you. I should show you my family photo album because I'm so glad my parents took pictures of this, because I think I had a really great fashion sense as a little kid, and I would put together these outfits that seemed kind of thought out. In one, I guess I'm supposed to be a Victorian lady, so I have this big picture hat with a rose in it, and an old broken umbrella is turned into a parasol, and I've got my mom's slip-on that becomes a long dress. So I'm amused and impressed that at that age I would put on this little. I was like a fashion show.
Yeah, like your own Project Runway or your own, drag race.
Around the neighborhood. I don't know what people thought.
Well, were your parents supportive? Because I know a lot of parents who totally love that their boy kids do that and encourage it. But this is my generation, which is maybe a different generation than your parents' generation. So were your parents supportive of that?
Well, yes. So we're starting in the late 50s, going into the 60s. So, but my parents were on I think they read Dr. Spock, and so they were on the liberal end of things, and I think they had mixed feelings about it. But
I love this because
they didn't try to stop me. They didn't try to stop me.
That's good, yeah. Because I'm also a costume designer, and I remember also as a kid dressing up a lot, like putting on, wrapping myself in blankets to make my own long gowns and stuff, and just finding different random outfits. So does your interest in fashion continue to this day, or did it sort of peter out as a kid?
Yeah, I think to me it was more about fantasy than fashion. It was about, I want to go into some other world and be other people and not be in my mundane 1950s, early 60s world. Though I also loved that, but I also wanted to have adventures. So I think that was it.
Yeah.
Hopefully I've retained some fashion sense, but I don't think my outfits now are up to what I was doing at 8, really.
That's disappointing. There's a lot of experimentation happening in fashion these days, and I love how it's becoming so there's so much variation in gender expression these days. There's one person who is a hetero cis guy who I follow on Instagram, and I forget his name. He's German. His first name is Mark, and he wears his big thing is he wears pencil skirts and high heels, and he every day he has tons of photos of these beautiful pencil skirts that he wears with these high heels, and he does Vogue and he does all these fashion shoots. So I'm a big fan of fashion. I'm a big fan of crossing gender barriers and breaking down those sorts of things.
I'm giving. Cut the interview. I'm stop being a writer. I'm going to become a fashion.
I know. Yeah.
Back to my roots of
yeah. But I'm sure that your interest in just the idea of fantasy has shown up in your work and in your writing, certainly. So like, is that kind of like how your creativity has evolved? You've gone from, as a kid, kind of exploring the like creative writing side of your self-expression, I guess you could say.
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know if this happens with other creative kids, but when we're younger, I was drawing, I was doing music, I was dressing up, I was reading, I was writing. And then as we get older, for most of us, it gets more focused on one of the above. But it's interesting that, so I don't know if that's a pattern that creative kids start kind of spread out, and then
I've noticed
less time for one thing as we get older.
Exactly. Yeah, I've noticed that with myself, because I used to be a big drawer, and I still am, and I teach drawing and stuff. But I used to draw all the time and also write. But now the writing has taken over. And so if I have any spare time, I spend it writing rather than drawing. And, just probably because being an adult, at least for me, because I'm a millennial, I have to work three jobs to make a living. And so you're like
3 hobbies.
Yeah, so it's like I have time for one hobby, and then the rest of it is like making my living. For you, like, was it that sort of thing where you evolved from, well, I only have so much free time, so I'm going to devote my free time to writing? Or was it like a specific interest took over, or did society beat the creativity out of you because society does that?
Well, no, I don't feel it was. I feel that I got more focused. The writing kind of won out over things like drawing and dressing up. Finally, I realized you really aren't supposed to be running around in women's clothing.
I say you are.
Well, we're really supposed to be talking about writing, but I'll just finish. So it went from there to then I would go into the bathroom and dress up in women's clothes with the door locked. And then it went to, I had a paper roll. So it was like a column of cardboard, and I would dress that up. And then I just stopped altogether. So that's what happened to dress up.
Yeah, but I blame capitalism. No, I blame I'm like, that's disappointing. Like,
of course, yeah.
Why can't we just like walk around wearing whatever we want? And I mean, even like you would think like, okay, I'm kind of like more of a feminine identifying person. So feminine identifying people tend to have a little bit more flexibility in the way that we dress. But still, like, if I had it my way, I would be in a full wig and like probably a ball gown and like fake eyelashes every day. But but yeah, you can't, if you go to the grocery store like that, people will give you funny looks. And it is a little bit disappointing how you're kind of little microaggressions or little ways that society like picks at you until you convert to conformity, I guess you could say.
Yes. Well, maybe writers, I don't know, maybe that's a safer way to be nonconformist in our fantasy world, is we start figuring out that's fairly safe. We go into our room and we sit down with our pen and paper and we enter fantasy worlds and create them and imagine people. So maybe that's where it gets channeled. But I will, you did touch on something, which is I often have female protagonists. I often have female lead characters, as in
yeah.
I mean, what's on the cover? It's a girl. So I think that fits together.
Yeah, and well, interestingly, like I find it easier to write male protagonists. Okay. I don't know. I think that people who are on the queer spectrum, and like I would say I'm like more of like a non-binary type of person. I think we can kind of cross those lines pretty easily.
Well, but for me, the more difficult line to cross is, am I going to write in the voice of a straight guy?
Yeah,
that's for me a line.
Yeah, would that be challenging for you to write in the voice of a straight guy?
I did it in a short story, Well, I also did it in a novel, but in particular in the story, so it was a guy who was Spanish, divorced, had a kid, and was straight. And so it had all these things that I wasn't, and I loved writing that story. It was so fun and challenging to think, am I getting him right? And what are the little bits and pieces I can put together for him? So I like challenges. I don't just want to write about gay men, I want to go boldly into other realms.
Definitely.
Including straight men.
Before we get into your current writing, what kind of books did you like as a kid?
As a kid, mainly fantasy. I was thinking about this. I grew up in Napa, California, and we had Napa had an old library called the Goodman Library. The city outgrew that, so they built another building, that became the adult library. So there was a library that was just the children's library, which was great. It was like a fantasy. So I can picture the shelves of mystery books, the shelves of science fiction books, and I think I more or less read at some point all of those books. But the ones that I remember were fantasy. The C.S. Lewis books, Mary Poppins. I can remember the day my parents bought me Mary Poppins in a beautiful hardcover edition. I guess I'd seen the movie and gotten interested. But I do have a special place for The Wizard of Oz because, so again, fantasy. Houses flying through the air and witches. And we had a copy, an old edition of The Wizard of Oz, pre-Judy Garland movie, so the old illustrations. And my dad would read that to me, and I loved it. I laughed at that.
So you are from Northern California. I'm from Northern California as well, from the San Francisco Bay Area. And I went to like summer camp in Napa, so I kind of know Napa a little bit.
Where were you exactly?
I'm trying to remember. It was, as a kid, you don't know where stuff is. You're just like, I'm going to the summer camp in Napa, and there's trees, and I don't know where it is, but
it's summer and it's hot.
Yeah, exactly. So what's Napa like in the 60s as you were growing up?
It wasn't the Napa Valley. It didn't have a lot of. It was just a kind of an agricultural community, and it was more diverse. They were growing prunes and growing plums to be made into prunes. And it wasn't just all focused on grapes and wineries, and didn't have a lot of name value cachet. I think I was in someplace like, I don't know, Paris or something, and there was a store called Napa.
Yeah.
Yeah, so none of that, that's all later. So when I was growing up, it was like an agricultural community.
Oh, like a very rural farm community. Interesting. And what was your path from wanting to, from reading, being creative, to wanting to become a writer that's actually published?
I guess I was a bookworm. So I guess like a lot of kids who are reading a lot, at some point we want to reverse the situation. We want to explore not just reading someone else's words, but creating our own words. And so I took my little pen in hand and was writing stories and bad poetry and so on. And then fatally, when adults would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would start to say, I want to be a writer. But a lot of kids, a lot of my peers were saying that as well. It was, but the other ones would get wise. Later as they got older, and they would start saying more practical things. I want to be a nurse, I want to be a veterinarian, I want to be an engineer, but I persisted and kept saying I want to be a writer, and so I kept doing what I thought was the things that one should do to become a writer, and here I am many years later and still doing it.
Okay, I'm curious, what are the things that one does when they want to become a writer?
Well, I wrote. There's other things.
there's going to college, there's going to open mics, there's, you know, finding like the local writing group. What was kind of like your path?
I gotta put I love symmetry, so I'm gonna put this
Yeah, good.
back in its little symmetrical place with my two. So statues. Well, you have to remember this is pre-internet, so this is me being dumb and not knowing what to do, particularly. So I think I wasted a lot of time. One of the ways I wasted time was I wasn't showing my work to people. Now we're much more in tune to critique groups and hire a freelance editor and get people to read your stuff. And now I completely understand that is absolutely necessary. But when I was younger, it was more like, no, I'm still working on it. I'm still working on it. And I would, you know, that would go on. The second novel went on for something like 13 years of piddling around and revising. So I'm more an example of in my youth of what textbook, what not to do. Do not do any of these things. But I kept the dream, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, so what are the things to not do? So one, the thing to not do
is drag these out of me. Well,
don't
not show
your work.
Show your work to other people. That's a big one.
Yeah.
But this was before MFAs. I don't know if MFAs existed or they maybe just weren't such a big thing when I was going to college. So the advantage of that is I eventually came up with ideas on my own for how to do these things. One thing I started doing is I would find a book that at least had the sort of the tone of what I was working on, and I would read that for 20 minutes before I started to write. And that I thought was a pretty good little trick. It would you would never be able to guess what the novel I was reading was. What it was that I was reading before I was working on something, but it helped just get me in it's like a conversation with the other author, the tone, the approach. So
that's a really good tip.
I developed.
Yeah, that's a really, really good tip. Tell us about what's your biggest like misconception that you had about publishing prior to being published that has now changed?
I'll answer that question by talking about, I think I may be in the middle of now I've already been published, so I'm not quite answering the question, but I think I'm in the middle of a misconception now, which has to do with the synopsis. So I very recently, really just within the last couple of weeks, I finished the book that I'm working on now. And so I got to the point of wanting to contact agents about it. So we all know, all the writers know, you do a query letter, which goes to the agent saying, here's what the book's about, and here I am. And we do a synopsis, which is a summary of the plot. And everyone's terrified of the synopsis and the query letter, but I got them done and revised them, spent a lot of time on them. And then I chose 6 agents that I sounded the best, that I really wanted to work with. And none of them asked for a synopsis. So I thought, okay, have I missed something? Are these now, we're not doing anymore synopses. So hopefully, I'm really hoping, gee, if I'm writing to more agents, someone will ask for the synopsis.
My agent will. So if you ever query Stephen Chudney, who's my agent.
He's on my list. He wasn't in the first 6, but he's.
Oh yeah, he would be
the 7th.
Yeah, he might be good for you because he's also gay and he's very pro gay literature and all of that. So yeah, he might be a good, but he will definitely ask for a synopsis.
Thank God. Oh, I'm writing to him as soon as this is over.
Pitch your book. Tell us about your book.
Right. What is this? What is the book about? I gotta get my prop. So Amy McDougall, Master Matchmaker. Amy is a 13-year-old mixed race girl who has been adopted by a single gay guy in San Francisco. And so she decides dad needs to not be single, he needs to get together with a boyfriend. And the perfect person to arrange this, find a boyfriend, is herself. And so it's basically a comedy. She tries crazy schemes to get her dad together with different guys, and then eventually she succeeds. And so that's maybe the first half of the book. And then now that she's on a roll with her matchmaking, she makes a match for the mother of her best friend, Grace. And then she makes a match for Grace. And so she really earns the title of master matchmaker. Part of the inspiration for the story was I got involved with a group which was for gay men who wanted to have children. And I talked with a guy at one of the meetings who was in this situation where he had adopted a girl as a single guy. So there's that real life origin, but then I connected that with, there was a movie in the 60s called The Courtship of Eddie's Father, which then became a TV series. So, and that was about a boy living with his single dad and trying to find a new wife for dad. So I actually used to, the original title of the book was The Courtship of Amy's Father. So it was a gay twist on this plot idea that I borrowed and updated.
Yeah.
But no, yeah.
Tell us about the day that you found out you were going to get published.
What I do remember more vividly than that day was the day when I first talked to the publisher who had agreed to publish the novel. Specifically that we got to talking about when is the book going to appear. And I knew that books typically take a year before the publisher says, yes, we're going to publish it. And then it's a physical book that appears in the world. And she said, it's going to take, it'll be 2 years. Mm-hmm. And I thought, not 1 year, 2 years. It's 1 year, it also kills us writers. But then she was saying 2 years.
That's how it was for me. Yeah.
That's too long. But what are you going to do? You say, all right.
Yeah, that's how, yeah.
You wait for 2 years.
Yep. And the poor kids, the poor debuts who had their book during the 2020, some of them had to wait 3 years, or even some cases 4 years, because of the backup that happened. Like with the printers were down, and so yeah, the publishing thing is a long haul. And did you do like much revising and editorial process when you went from the initial offer to when your book got published?
Yeah, well, with this book, I'll try to tell a really brief version of it. The main thing was I had an agent for the book. It was still The Courtship of Amy's Father. The agent sent it out to maybe 10 editors. I'm all excited. It's going to get published by a big publishing company. And no one took it. So then, as you were saying, I got the feedback from the editors, and the agent correctly said, we need to look at this and see how we can improve the book for the next batch of editors. And then she said, I've got it. For one thing, they're saying maybe it's the voice sounds young, so let's make her younger. Okay. So then we go from YA to MG, because she was 17 and then she becomes 13. MG is a different style. It's that. And then a week later, she calls and says, I just had the most brilliant idea, the most brilliant insight. It's actually 2 books. So you need to cut it in half, because in the second half, everyone goes to Puerto Rico. And she said, no, I think you need to cut all of that out. So I had to change it from YA to MG, and then I had to write a new second half of the book. And it was one of the most painful experiences of my writing life to have to do that, just to, okay, throw it out.
Yeah.
Do what she says. And then, but now I love it. And I always wonder, why didn't I think of this before? It works so well.
Yeah.
So I guess it was a happy ending.
Yeah, definitely. What do your first drafts look like?
Well, everyone's most, if we're using the computer, our first drafts look good because it's all lovely and it's a Word document. But one peculiarity of my first drafts is when I'm not sure about something or something has to be filled in or researched or there's a problem, I put it in brackets. Mm-hmm. So for me, the draft to final version involves a lot of removing, there are fewer and fewer brackets because I'm getting things right or finalizing things. So
the brackets,
the last thing I do.
Insert emotion here. Like yeah, okay, cool. And what's your favorite step? Is it drafting or is it revising?
I think there's something to be said for both, and some things to be said against both. Drafting, it's exciting. There's the blank page ahead of you. Anything can happen. All systems are go. But it's also a blank page, and you're really, oh my God, what happens next? And how do I get her over here and him over here? And then revising is more kind of cozy, and it's less exciting, but it's more less scary. So there's something to be said for both.
Are you a morning or an evening writer?
I'm sorry.
Are you a morning writer or evening writer?
Definitely morning. Yeah. Sometimes I manage, so I get up maybe at 6:30, and sometimes I manage to, or circumstances draw me towards just getting up, sitting down and writing. And that, I wish I could do that more often. I'd just say it's 7 and I'm going to write for 5 hours. But that feels kind of grim and difficult. But my mind is really awake in the morning.
Yeah.
So instead, what I do is I go for a run and I have breakfast and I answer emails. And so that maybe at 11, 11:30, 12, I'll actually start working. But I could not, if you told me for the rest of your writing life, you're going to have to write in the evening and the night, I'd say I'm hanging up my hat. I can't do it.
Are you a plotter or a pantser? Do you plot or do you kind of just like go by the
go hell? I wish I could say I was a pantser because that sounds exciting and wild and crazy. And wouldn't you like to be in the pantser clique? Sounds like Panther or Panzer Division or something. But I don't think that's me. I think I'm in the other group, which is the plotters, which sounds to me like plotters. Yeah, I'm more plot. I start with a concept, maybe more than a plot, but the concept of girl adopted by a single gay dad in San Francisco, and then I work from there.
Was there ever a revision suggestion that was real? Well, you told us about that.
I think I answered that.
Yeah, that wonderful second.
Really, sorry, go ahead.
Have you gotten any other writing tips along the way that have been extremely helpful?
Oh, I can't think of anything that sort of like a general trick or approach or something. The critiquing process is always fascinating to me. You think it's all done and set, and how could they possibly have anything to say about this? And it's really quite good, and that they do, and you need to listen to it.
Yeah,
I do have another tip that I created. If you want to hear that?
Yes, I do. What's your?
I think this works for me. As a writer, what do we have to communicate with people? We have words on a page. It's a bit chilly, words on a page. It's not a film, it's not with music and people that we see. So how do we get more emotion into our writing is a question, I think, at least for me. So what I started doing was I would have a particular piece of music that made me cry. And I would play that. I would cry, I would get emotional.
Oh.
And then I would start to think about the scene. And it helped me just to push the emotions in the scene farther and make them more vivid and stronger. So
I love that.
Mhm.
Like, it's like method acting almost, like getting really into the emotion of the scene prior to writing it.
And I when you say that, I bet there are writers who get up and act out the scene, and that works for them.
Awesome.
Something other than just sitting in a quiet room with a computer.
Yeah. What are you working on next?
Well, the one that I just finished is a YA novel called Blockadia. And so it's about 3 Seattle teenagers who go on a summer road trip around the US and Canada, making a documentary film about the protests against climate change drivers like fracking and mountaintop removal and pipelines. So it's a kind of political activism YA, which I found when I was trying to find comps, it's not a subject that is dealt with very much, as far as I could make out. So I thought, either that means no one's going to be interested, or they're going to be very interested. Hopefully, I did a good job.
That could be
as you know, some of this, we're going against the law. We're going against the system, the capitalist, patriarchal.
Exactly.
And the cops come after them, or the sheriffs come after them. So
yeah,
I can see being a little cautious.
Yeah. In fact, I was just talking with my sister about this because my sister has taken some heat too. And it's the situation is like, if you are fighting for the environment, for animals, for exposing threats to public health, you get called a terrorist. But if you are actively harming the environment, harming animals, and harming public health, you get tax incentives. Because that's how it works with, if you can make money doing it, our government will support you and give you tax credits and help you build your corporation. But if you're working to expose it, you are a terrorist. And so that's kind of that's what the kids are up against, as it were. And
they're not imagining it. They are up against it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But of course, the interesting thing about climate change, is it's going to come back to haunt us. We think it isn't just let's be nice to animals. All this perspective that we have is now, our forests are burning down. Our climate is getting hotter. We can't just sequester ourselves in our little human world and not care about anything else. It's not going to work.
Yeah, because it will the consequences, and San Francisco might end up either on fire or underwater, depending on what happens.
What is going to happen first? The earthquake? I actually moved back to San Francisco recently after living abroad. So on my list of things to do was, okay, there's earthquake water, get big containers for water. And then there's, and then air purifiers and masks for the fire season.
Yeah.
So that came before things like, I don't have any silverware, but I have 2 air purifiers because I thought that's taking priority.
Yeah.
In July, it's taking priority.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hopefully it doesn't end up like last year where the sky was, were you there when the sky was red?
No, I was in Paris.
Okay.
But this year I'm here. So I hope this is not like last year.
Hopefully it's not as bad, but yeah, hopefully hopefully we won't get earthquakes that are too big this year. We'll see.
I completely am with you there. Or dear God, can we have the fires and then the earthquake separately? But let's not have them together, please. Or let's not have COVID plus fires plus earthquake. Or one at a time.
Yeah, we shall see. Well, it's been great talking to you. Oh, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, I suppose started my website, which is conveniently my name, garypedler.com, GaryPedler.com. And I have 3 books, and so you can see the 3 books on the website. Amy, the most recent book. But the other 2 are adult books.
Perfect. Well, it's great talking to you. I have put bio links down below the video where you can find links to Gary's books and also website and Twitter. Thank you so much for being on the channel.
I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you so much for doing this. And let's have part 2 at some point.
Definitely.
When the new book comes out.
Definitely. That sounds great.